You wrote that very interesting piece on sort of what was happening in terms of the finance and so you mentioned SingularityNET and what's happening in sort of the capture of different efforts in order to basically token issuance that were not necessarily in the interest of the projects themselves, and so there's this there's that part of the governance, and I think you made this issue as a governance. I mean, you've been having a lot of podcasts and talking with lots of different people about holonic approach to different kinds of governance mechanisms, and I think you've been making this journey. And one of the reasons I wanted to go back to your original piece is say, okay, you talked about holonic governance. Then where do you see it evolve? What do you think some of the opportunities, weaknesses, things that are coming into being in terms of the technology infrastructure? Then I'm going to be interested in sort of saying that you're taking that as I was very interested in your piece with Joel Dietz, and so that got a lot of response. And I've known Joel, and actually we met fairly recently again in Crescent City, and now he's working with Michael Levin too. And there is this sort of notion that decentralization is going to solve the problem. I think exactly, or that the free markets. There's a way of framing things that is still sort of, I thought, locked in older paradigms. So one of the pieces I sent to you more recently, is saying I think there's a whole new framework for looking at these things, that we're going to have to break away from our old traditional templates. And I think what's happening, I'm just sort of setting this thing up, what's happening in this whole area of scientific agents being able to do discoveries, this is becoming really quite compelling. I don't know if you Marcus Bueller's work, but a lot of there's a number of other things that the whole scientific method now is being codified into agents and accelerating things. And I think that's going to create a new infrastructure. And I think when we think, what are the principles and foundations that we can trust? And then, so if there's a transparent scientific method that can codify, and you can align that with a way of issuing tokens of value, and that was what that piece was about, what I call about agentic finance, thermodynamic agentic finance. Then you have things that are, I would argue, are not capturable. So I think that I think we share a critique. We share a really appreciation of doing things that are consonant, embedded in nature, not trying to dominate nature. But how do we get beyond the rhetorical, the performative, into things that actually scale and accountable? And one of the big points I want to make here is I think it has to be investable. I think you have to have instruments you can invest in, because right now the business model is what's driving everything, right? I mean, whether it's crypto, it's a pump and dump scheme, whether it's LLMs, the Magnificent Seven, it's all about basically a capitalist model that's concentrating power and money and using in consumption of energy in a very extractive way. And so we just have to break that grip. And I don't know if I think you're sympathetic to that, but I
I hope you don't want me to solve it now, John. Just,
well, actually, I think I think there is a solution to it. Actually, I really think, there's a new infrastructure that's coming out, the scientific infrastructure of learning systems, and it can be principled. And so it's looking at things not within the old templates. So how would you like to sort of begin the introduction and the discussion? Sort of, I mean, what from your point of view and the kind of
well,
narrative?
I mean, from my perspective, which you know very well, since this is kind of a continuation of our conversations, and and it has to do with flow, my
Right.
perspective, and we are
Right.
on Riverside here, so we're continuing with the flow of the conversation towards that symbiotic intelligence which you proposed. But I think if it is to cut to the chase, the main issue is this transition from value, from speculative valuation to real value, and redefining what is value, and really what is value for humanity, for nature, for the the integral wholeness of the universe. And sorry to sound like bombastic here with the universe, but we
No,
are a
that's
part of that, right? The blue dot is just a part of that, and there are models, of course, which you also use in your proposed let's say solution with this symbiotic governance, symbiotic intelligence.
yeah.
So I think we have the solution. What I like to do, if you don't mind, is just to tell you and not to discourage, please. I hope you will you will help me here, because I mean this is not, of course, this we know. Yeah, George Gilder wrote Life After Capitalism. I don't know if you read that one, right? So he may not be very popular with some of the readers, but I just have to say here that I think he is right on. He says, in part, superabundance is what economists call consumer surplus, what we get but do not pay for. So it's again those values, right, of care, of interrelationship, the less mechanistic values, the less transactional values that actually we do not account for in our economy.
No, that's
And
right.
he also, yeah, so he also gives the laws. He says the 10 do's and don'ts for a thriving economy, right? And one of them is very interesting. It's like entropy, because it falls into what you're talking about with the free energy and so on. He says, don't give guarantees. Entropy and surprise are what define information, knowledge, and learning. And then government guarantees thwart discovery and surprise and suppress learning. So all what we do, let's say for the benefit and in the name of the benefit of society and so on, is actually wrong, because it does not respect the laws, the natural laws. There are so many more examples. If you want to go in another direction, but I wanted also to give you this. I don't know if you read
No,
Throwing
I know,
Rocks.
Doug. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I know that you know Doug, but I really invite the audience to read this book, and at least maybe the last chapter, Investing Without Exiting. No, so what I'm saying is that
Sure, sure.
solutions have been proposed, right? And he says here, run your business as a commons platform cooperatives, that he gives an example here. And then he moves on and has a table, which is really amazing. It's just, you may just post it if you want, or which says it goes from the artisanal economy, which we had at
Yeah.
your retreat 10 years ago. Yes, we had Maurizio there,
Many said, right.
to exactly, and he is the artisanal economist, right? And then to the industrial, digital industrialism, and then digital distributives, which I think you are kind of referring about, and that is not a solution. But I think it's not a solution because it's not being implemented as it should be, and
Right.
nobody cares, because this book by our common
I know
friend
David the
David
instructor.
Bollier,
Right.
this book says it all, but nobody cared, right? And the thing is, I mean, Doug says here, artisanal economy, yeah? So optimized for creation of value. Industrial, for extraction of value. Digital industrialism optimized for destruction of value. And that's the thing, yeah, with the speculative valuation and the algorithms. The economy of algorithms, which is another book which is so good, which spells it all out. So we're inventing the wheel, or singing, preaching to a lot of choir, but
But there's a very,
the problem is we do not. So
I agree.
let me just finish this.
Okay.
And then the digital distributives optimized for exchange of value. Yeah. And that is again the relational, the exchange, the I would call it, also Will Rudick. Yeah. He has his suggested economics, which I think they're really good, but they haven't been tried at scale. And my problem is, and I do not know how to reconcile this, but I feel a bit discouraged, I have to tell you, as optimistic as I am. I mean,
Yeah.
how are we gonna implement all this and yours when nobody is paying attention. And I think the big issue here is attention, right?
Okay,
So that
I'm very sympathetic with all the points you made. I think this is why I think that the way you get people's attention is that you create instruments that actually generate value and they can accrue value over time, and that they can actually create systems of exchange that are not extractive, that are symbiotic and are stable, and so it really has to work as a financial instrument. And so it's what I mean investable, and it has to be able to perform that way. And a lot of people will talk about the sort of the aspirational aspect of it, and this is all about the commons, and that's been around for many years. And I, I know Rushko, I know David. I mean, and Eleanor Ostrom, and I live in an area that sort of still believes in parts of that, but that does not succeed in a capitalist society with it. It was highly competitive, and you have to have a system that can scale, that can outcompete what the current system is. And so that's why I'll argue, what is the new way of thinking of value? Right now, value in a classic, and we'll start in a minute, but I think this is good setting up, because I think value right now is based on the classic notion of arbitrage, that you do not know. You have a buy, a sell, you have a spread, and then whatever resolves that is what the price is, and price is value. And that is a very that's the coming out of a capitalist system, but it has it counts on information asymmetries. It's not incentivized to actually accumulate knowledge and reduce uncertainty over time. It doesn't learn. And so once we build something that can learn over time, this is where I get back into active inferencing, the learning loop, and the AI agents, that they learn and they reduce uncertainty. So part of the discussion I want to make is, and I think the good topic here is, what is value? How do we recognize value? And how do we recognize value that is aligned at a multi-scale alignment with not just our own system, but a nature itself, that we actually, the moral imperative is be able to live within the boundaries and the abundance of nature, but not to do it in an extractive way. And this is where I think the scientific method comes in. This is where the fact that you can have automated agents that are getting smarter and smarter in discoveries and be transparent and explain what they are. And then that's a way of recognizing value. What you're doing is you're reducing uncertainty, you're creating goods that are likely to work, minimize uncertainty at the reduced energy, the minimal cost. So you're really creating affordable public goods. And that's the incentive. And the incentive is not to have a zero-sum exploit of the other person to concentrate wealth, but to generate value at the minimum cost and minimum uncertainty. That's what I would argue is the direction, and I think we're going to build on a new infrastructure that's coming out now in the scientific community of doing that. So that's sort of where my head is, and in the paper I sent to you, it was an attempt to pull those ideas together. So it's you're creating now tokens not based upon speculation or extraction, but actually but actually creating genuine innovation, deflationary innovation that is distributed to everybody. It's a public good. It's not a private good. Anyway, does that make
yeah.
sense to you?
Yeah, well, let me tell you how I see this. Yeah,
Okay, and then we'll
I
start.
see it. I see it. Well, this is how I see it. I do not know. I don't want to qualify in different terms and so on and so forth. But so there are 2 points here to how I see this. One is, it's like what Bitcoin was created for. Yes, to enforce trust between untrustworthy agents, right? Which already said a lot about humanity, right? So, and actually, where we ended up, yes, as a humanity, through societies and all, and I call this, our curse, the curse of capture. So every society is captured by those who own the rails and the treasuries and so on and so forth. So how about if we reverse this? Like trust is definitely yes, and many sociologists, psychologists are talking about the trust account, yes, which we create through relationship and in time, yes. So you put more trust, like through your behavior, you enforce that,
Right.
and the more trust you have in the account, the more you're maybe standing in society. In of course, indigenous tribe, it's still that is perpetuated, but in our society, no longer, right? It's like whoever speculates better. So it's like whoever takes more, oh, those are glorified, but not those who have the moral standing and the trust. So that's one thing, right? Which we departed from. It's fundamental. Another one is, well, we are heading toward the future very, 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 very fast, in which and this is about the economy of algorithms, but now these algorithms are really becoming much more powerful and smarter than us, and of course heading toward the AGI. Yes. Well, this is creating an unraveling of labor as we know it, and labor is actually what capitalism is. It's standing on, right? So without, okay, now I'm gonna have the AI do everything, so the labor is changing, and it's like, okay, what remains for the human? Yeah, because now I'm no longer how much I can accumulate, how much because AI is doing it. So it is maybe a moment to redefine value, and what is maybe the value residing in our humanity, maybe in the care, maybe in the coherence, learning. And now I want to tie it with the latest, because you mentioned scientific findings, right? Because we also, you had Federico Pagini here and so on and so forth. And I recently had let's 3 rounds of podcasts, one after the other, with two scientists which I met also, where we were together in Barcelona at
Yeah.
the Science of Consciousness conference. And they have proven scientifically, and the papers have just been published, that we practically, yes. I don't want to apologize for putting it this way, because it's not me. Yes, it's like this is, he is a quantum scientist also, Heinrich Pass, who wrote the one, right? So that we actually live in a field, and it's relation is before, relation is first, and then there is me. So first is how I
For sure.
relate to you and to all the others, and that we have to change the whole paradigm and the whole education. So I think it's speaking of first principles, John. It's it's even more fundamental, at least from what I understood you saying, than what you are
What?
explaining there in terms of the
No,
economic
no. I
control.
would
Because I
actually.
think your symbiosis, yes, is actually the fundamental thing
What's
here.
that? What's that?
Your symbiosis, or
There should be.
your
Well, no,
own
I
good,
think
and
even
how
more
you see it.
fundamental than that. And no, I think that going back. I mean, we should start this vet pretty soon. But I think the notion of the intersection between the quantum and the classical, and actually that in consciousness, and life itself is comes together in that interaction, and so it is sort of the collapse of a quantum into a classical space that actually creates life and awareness, intelligence, and it's being able to understand that and be able to be part of that rather than to control it, and be able to be open to that and be able to understand those principles is how, what I would argue is, it should be the architecture of society and our economy. And so symbiosis is one aspect of that. But we can, I think we can evolve in the conversation. What I like to do is to open it up. So I think that in a lot of us are looking at, we're talking about what's happening with large language models and the problems there, the concentration of wealth, the concentration of power, and a lack of any kind of a governance mechanism. So we're recognizing these flaws, and I think that from my point of view, and I think we share this, is that the economic or the business model is shaping this, and that comes down to how do you recognize value? What is value? Are the incentive systems that structure the investment and the build out of this whole new kind of infrastructure? And I think that what we're seeing right now is sort of a collapse of the Anthropocene industrial model of how we think of the world that's based upon the Newtonian mechanics. It's sort of mechanics. It's sort of the wrong mechanics for living things. They didn't have the mechanics for living things. Now we understand it through biology, and now we have and not only just biology, but the understanding of the quantum quantum fields, what quantum reference fields, the nature of things being whole, and that we actually, when we move into a classical space and have the collapse, then we have this sort of interface between this is the arrival of consciousness, the arrival of life, this sort of this interplay that we're seeing. We never had that perspective before. And so these are these principles that we're discovering. So how do we design institutions in economies and finance that are aligned with these? Is that something that resonates with you? I mean, I know that you've been talking about the commons aspects of things, but what is value? What is the mechanism for recognizing value? And how is the current system was based upon speculation? It's really a wager system that says, well, value is what people are willing to pay for something, you know, and value is fungible because there's all about assets, it's things. And so one thing can be substituted for another. So the human life is fungible, the biosphere is fungible. And we know that's not true. They're living things, the boundaries, the relationships that are absolutely integral for keeping things together. You're creating life, for creating awareness. And this is where I argue the whole idea of Markov blankets, I think, are extremely deep concept that is really important. In other words, a Markov blanket has a boundary. In order for it to stay alive, to stay aware, it has to make predictions and manage its energy in such a way that respects those boundaries. And there are many, many types of Markov blankets embedded in one another. So a multicellular system is a kind of Markov blanket. A market is a Markov blanket composed of different minds interacting. So it's not a mechanical thing, and they aren't infinitely fungible, just as the organs of the body are not fungible. You can't have that brain take over the lungs. You can't. They each have their own coherence and their own way of communicating with one
Exactly.
another. And so it's being able to decode that and be able to build institutions and actions and infrastructure that enable that. So what are your thoughts in that slight rant there? Because I think what we find is this argument for superabundance and accelerationism is like things without any limit. And the idea is not so much an idea of freedom, the degrees of freedom, but in the living things is always freedom within the constraint. And I think one of the points that you make in your work on holographic and holography, holonics is that each little thing has a representation of the whole in it, and that so as it combines into greater things, it just doesn't maximize its own definition itself, but how it fits into a larger whole. And this is where you get the multi-scale, multidimensionality of living things working in concert with one another. Um, and and there is a way of calculating and modeling that, and that's one of the more recent innovations that's come about. Way back, Ross Ashby notion of ultra stability and homeostats. I think he had a really strong insight to that. More recent work by Marcus Buehler in being able to model the development of an embryo and understand that came out. I mean, and these are the kind of things we're talking about. So we're really getting to understand the mechanisms and not just make it so, oh, we should love each other. And this, no, this is how life works and the constraints of it. We have to understand those constraints and build things within those constraints and infrastructure that respects that. I mean, there are the physics of these constraints and the biology of these, and it has their own vocabulary. But we can't just say, oh, obliterate all boundaries. And this is to me, the dominant narrative out there to say, oh, this is going to get bigger and bigger and it all fixes itself and everyone's going to have a job. Well, don't worry about that. But I think what happened in the Industrial Revolution with the enclosures in the end of the in the beginning of the 19th century was an enormous amount of poverty. And Hogarth wrote about this, and they had no jobs, they had no place. Their definition of themselves was destroyed, and then work is redefined to fit within an industrial complex. Now that's gone, and so what do you see as the replacement for that? What is the alternative? If you're part of a living thing and you're valuing each person's contribution, what is the new social contract? What do you see as the new social contract? I think it's too easy to say it's a commons. I mean, I don't, 'cause
Well, John, let me tell you here, and thank you for bringing it to the comments, because I didn't know where to where from to
Interesting.
catch all what you presented here. So let's go there, right? Okay. So and as I mentioned before, I mean, we how we live today, right now, may change tomorrow drastically. It depends on the
Right.
exponential trajectory, yes, of the artificial intelligence. So we must not ignore that, because since 10
Right.
years ago, when I wrote the organic governance, and yeah, things have changed so dramatically. And I say, yes, I mean, however you would like, and I can see that you want quantify and but all this is changing, because it will become meaningless, the labor, maybe even exactly the notion of contribution,
Yeah.
of merit, let's put it this way. Okay, so because I mean, I used to say, if I don't write it, nobody will be able to capture its meaning like I do. And trust me, I feel so frustrated when the AI, even now, however you want to call them, dumb LLMs,
Yeah.
they actually capture it better and more compelling than me. So where is my merit now? So what do we quantify now? So this is all really drastically changing. And this is why I was saying, and I think this connects also with the spiritual angle and the Platonic spaces of Mike Levin, which is just now is just the right time for him to bring those to the fore. Why? Because they actually explain the natural order of things, and
Exactly.
then I forgot who wrote Trust in the Order of Things. It's like, I read this about 40 years ago. There is a natural order of things, and Mike is spelling it out and proving that actually, yes, our behaviors are according, or can be according, to that natural order of things. But what we have done, we have mechanized humanity. We have discretized it, and are guiding it by bureaucracies that actually are totally counterproductive, and are excluding completely let's call them unmeasurable, yes, like you mentioned, love and caring, and collective wisdom, right? How do you how do you quantify that? And that's why this new, I mean, it is new for us, but it's like revealing of the natural order in terms of like the conference where we have been, right? The science of consciousness right now, of which we become more and more aware, is revealing actually that this natural order, I do not know if it can be quantifiable or not. But for example, there are models like the energy matter information model of I was mentioning Tommaso Firo and Marco Cavaglia in their very recent work. They are revealing actually how we function. And you mentioned the cells, right? So from the cells, actually, this is, and Marco is an anesthesiologist. So he's an expert on switching on and off the consciousness, the awareness. I'm like, that's true. That's already something we should have thought about. Yeah. But that, because we practically, how we function from the cells to the organism is through these vibrations that he calls,
That's right.
he has investigated the vicinal water, so there are these vibrations, first of all in our own organism, and that's how cells can find each other and become liver or heart cells. And then and what Michael is calling, if I nudge a bit one of these cells, they're going to do something completely different. So that is the free energy, right? Because they're going to do something different, but they will know to mend wounds. Why? Because, again, we are patterns as we are and as we function
Exactly.
now, although unawarely. But there are more possibilities in the Platonic space, so we can behave in more ways, and so do ourselves. So it is indeed a radical way, a radically different way of looking at things, and maybe even our vocabulary, which is based on the culture in which we grew up,
Right.
right? So
Right.
how do we encode, how incentives and so on and so forth? But there are deeper forces here, and if people, at least, I don't want to even qualify. Yes, I think, at least maybe I should talk about myself. Yeah, I mean, I feel. Yeah, you feel when there's something wrong or right. We feel like love is a surge of energy, and it exists. It is real. How do we quantify it? It's more or less. It's whatever. So we have to find measures for these manifestations, because at least in my conversations, which are also now revealing to me this whatever is forever truth in spirituality, but now scientifically is being
Yes.
proven, is that we actually all live in a bubble, like in a field, in this field.
That's
and
right.
and if we are, for example, want to coordinate work in a team, it's completely different than the manager smacking you and putting you in a corner as a cog. You do this and you do that, and now bam, and you didn't do it right, which is very violent, right, towards the humanity. Versus, I want to contribute. And it is because I feel that by contributing, I fulfill my existence. So, it is so natural. Like, why did you write that book? Why are we here in this
Yeah.
conversation?
That's right.
It is
That's right.
because we feel we want to contribute, and we can contribute that. And the thing is, everybody has something to contribute, and that's the beauty of the
Exactly.
diversity. So there's this unity in diversity. Everybody contributes, and if we are aware of that, and this is what happened also at your retreat, right? I mean, we just found our own place, and then the book emerged, and it's like, yes, I can contribute this, I can contribute that. And so that is a different way of versus transactional, reductionist, and
Absolutely.
incentivized.
Absolutely.
No incentive will have brought me here, John, except my respect for you. And as you say, that trust which we built along the years, although we haven't been in touch much, but I followed your work, and and
Same. No, no,
and
it's no, I totally concur with that. I mean, I think this ability. I mean, the Stuart Hameroff. We were talking about the uh, basically in Penrose's work and the orchestrated reductionism and the ability to have microtubules at different frequencies and actually moving away from a sort of a computational discrete model into something that is you have these fields that are activated. And of course, this is Michael Levin's work. And so that is a really profound new paradigm, and that memory doesn't exist in some thing or even in the DNA. It actually it exists in fields, bioelectrical fields, and that you have these different fields and concentrations that have their own coherence that are synchronizing with one another. That of course is a radically different paradigm than the computational paradigm that we've been brought up in. And one of the things that Hameroff would say that and when we were at the conference was that the idea of a computer based neurophysiology is like a cartoon. It's just not, there's much more complex and nuanced than that. But that's when you start to introduce the quantum reference state into being a primary, and that space time is not fundamental. I mean, so this starts to tap into the conflict between the secular enlightenment notions that force everything within a classical framework to the more traditional sort of religious notions of saying there's something irreducible, there's something that is inherently uh, complete, unitary principle, and that we have been focusing just on the reduction of things into transactional mechanistic space, and now we're starting to understand the intersection between those two. And in all of that, I mean, and in my own life, it was like, that is really primary. It's the quantum reference field is more primary than the classical. And so I think what we find in sort of what I feel is a lot of the notion of accelerationism and abundance is actually trying to make the classical space everything and sort of cram it in and sort of live forever and be everything and break all boundaries. Whereas in fact, what it is this intersection of a consciousness trying to know itself and all the different aspects of itself. It's always working within certain boundaries, defining new boundaries. These are the Markov blankets that are dynamically aligning themselves, and out of that comes meaning and context, and a respect for the diversity of things. And you can actually go into regulatory theories of regulation. And this is Ross Ashby. The requisite law of requisite variety in complex systems is the capacity to be able to represent the most diverse things. That is the more to understand something is to be able to model it. And so it is, that is empathy, that is symbiosis. It's like each mind trying to model the other mind. And one of our podcasts we had with Matt Brown, who's applying Ashby's notions of ultra stability and polystability to robotic arms, and what he was finding is that when you have a network, each node is trying to predict every other one, and when something goes out of range, then they collapse, they synchronize into a new pattern. And so it's not so much as an error term, it's it's a new kind of information that comes in that recalibrates the whole, which is different to say, no, it's an error term, cut it out, it's a long tail, it's a black swan, whatever. It's a very different notion of statistics. And we're getting away from the frequentist model of statistics that is just, I think, is just brain dead. I mean, it's just remarkable.
Okay.
And it has its grip. It owns economics and finance. And so that's one of the things that we've been interested in, is targeting that and say, hey, you've got to change that. Because it's that mindset that allocates capital and is growing this cancer, basically. It's a cancer. It's having to create others everywhere in order to grow itself. And so you have to have this more superior mechanism. And so I think I'm not trying to be reductionist and say it's incentives, but it's understanding another reality and bringing that into and doing alignment with that will provide greater value, greater stability, greater meaning, and that will supplant this more it's a more archaic way of looking at things. I mean, it's an older science.
I think, that's the thing with the vocabulary, because, of course, we mean something else with meaning and so on. Because why? Like, when Mike Levin is showing those anthrobots and xenobots and then giving them nudging, or he shows when he nudges a cell and then completely changes behavior and becomes something else. So it's not practically incentivizing the cell. I think it is energizing it a little bit like a quantum of energy so that it can tap into those spaces which are already there. And more recent works, uh,
It's an
like
interesting.
in particular, yeah, McGilchrist with now the matter with things. He is also very much looking at how we are created, how we function, and that actually there are patterns. He
Right.
very clearly explains there are patterns of like beauty, goodness, and truth, but he also said there are patterns of evil as well. And he has seen both as a psychiatrist. And then how now the question is, in this world in which we are converging in with our gods, as you well say in your upcoming book, um, when labor is giving me meaning, speaking of meaning, is kind of like wiped out, right? So labor is like, let's say I'm incentivized for labor so I can accumulate. Well, this model, we can call it capitalism, we can call it whatever we want, but this is how the world works today. This is shifting now because the labor disappears. And then what? Then what gives us meaning? And okay, what is flourishing? So now new questions are coming. Yes. Is flourishing owning the Lambo or the biggest home in Hollywood? Is flourishing, what is flourishing now when actually all this is becoming more or less meaningless, less like labor and incentives and so on. So I think this is our opportunity, and on the cusp of this wave, which is breaking now, of the old economy, the new discoveries, the new revealing of what you call like reality as well. Yes,
Right.
that Michael is revealing, that many others who you have on your First Principles podcast are revealing, Don Hoffman and so on and so forth. It's the right time now to build on this with new vocabulary, with new models, and the question is, how do we actually transition from this wave that is crashing, so that we practically provide this parachute, or however you want to
A
call it,
transition.
landing, safe
Right.
self-landing, yes, for the world, to nudge it on the flourishing trajectory that actually I think it's kind of, we can see it now, yeah, in reside in resonance, in coherence, in, and very much so in the spiritual values that now are scientifically proven more and more. So
Yeah.
but that is, it's such a radical shift, and the wave is almost ready to crash with the acceleration of the AGI, that this is what, as I was telling in the beginning, makes me very uneasy these days, John, especially like we are, transitioning in a new year and new objectives. And I'm thinking, I just feel a lot of anxiety now related to this, right? Because maybe you expected me to give you a solution, and I know you have the
No,
books,
no,
and
no.
I'm reading all these books which have the solutions. But can we actually implement it fast enough to save
Well, let me
to
let
save
me try to
whatever
be
is to
more.
be saved?
I'm I mean, often I'm not that optimistic. But in this case, I'm optimistic, and here's why I am
Thank you.
optimistic.
I need it.
It's because it's what and we see this in the models, and we see this in the making explicit knowledge in a way that was never explicit, and in a way is testable. And right now, where everything is being exploited. We're not going to trust anything. I mean, with Sora coming out there, everything's being gamed. Everything is so. It's like, where am I?
Thank you.
Where
You
am I?
understand why I feel
No, and
anxiety.
nothing grounded. And so what do I trust? Well, I can't trust my eyes. I can't trust what I see. I can't trust what I'm told. And this is going to be exploited viciously. But what's happening is that we're getting a criteria for saying what is trusted knowledge, and that is embodied in this next generation agent and AI. In other words, I can make predictions as to what something is, and it can be shared and understood and verified in a way there's never before. And that's why I'm very excited about this whole idea of psi agents, scientific agents, because they're actually making scientific breakthroughs that make real differences, real materials, cure diseases. And so there is a truth condition thing. There is a way of organizing beliefs around outcomes. And then if you align that with a token, a currency that captures that, and that becomes something that you can put resources in, and people can then issue that based upon the ability to reduce that to augment these good things. In other words, I think there's a whole incentive system, excuse the use of the word, that actually creates collective organization. I mean, with two things that really organize people, it's beliefs You know, you can have certain shared beliefs and intentions that create religious movements, but there's also currencies in capital. There's a set of rules, and I follow that, and I can, if you reinvent those and combine those, then you create a new system that is holistic, is not reductionistic, that values, I think, values every person's contribution, and I think there's the underlying science is rewarding that. I mean, it is the principle of least action some underneath this is driving this. And you see in different scientific quarters people talking about this in different ways. But there is there is a sort of emerging consensus as to what we're talking about, the fusion of a deeper traditional understanding of things that are beyond reduction. And we can now say that's a quantum reference field. We can now we can actually measure that, talk about work. So that to me is very exciting. It pulls these different things together, and it creates a ground truth. There is such a thing as a ground. It's evolving. It's never perfect. It's never complete. But it's a process that each thing is trying to understand every other thing and incorporate it, not reduce it, but value it and bring it into a larger network, increasing complexity and value that way. So that to me is a positive dynamic. But what we're experiencing right now is the extreme collapse, and it's going to get a lot worse. I mean, I think I don't know with you if
That's,
you
of course, reason
yeah,
for
I mean,
enough anxiety, right? So,
I mean,
yes.
it's going to get. I mean, because we're not going to be able to. I mean, we have what you say. Quantum computing is going to break a lot of the encryption codes. You're going to have a lot of stuff that we talked about, sovereign identity and this and that, and the data, and all of that's going to be grabbed, and but it's therefore going to value what we're talking about and make it absolutely essential, not discretionary, to have this kind of new infrastructure. And it can prove itself. It validates. It's not he said, she said. It actually is capturing part of nature's reality and aligning ourselves. That's how I see it.
Yes, and it's this, I think this attention, as in Miguel Chris calls it, I just make it my mantra. Attention is a moral act. So it's the inner compass. I think, which,
Yep,
and
yep.
somehow, I don't know, but I can speak for myself. Yes, I mean, I feel it very deeply when I do the right thing or not.
That's
And I
right.
do not know if our society or culture has wiped out this sense, which we innately have. And only the strong and the brave ones can still feel it. Because I'm told so many times when I publish something and say it boldly, you are brave. I'm like, oh, I didn't know this is an act of courage, right? So it's like I thought it's normal because it's the right thing to do. So and that is one big issue here, yes, because that's why we don't pay attention to the right thing, and therefore, the increasing awareness so that we can more intuitively feel the right and wrong. Yes, I think that's also an important thing. And again, as you mentioned, the relational, the let's say nested networks, which are actually is how the relational
That's
functions,
right.
if I
That's
may, and
right.
models related to that,
Well,
and the real, what is complexity science, right? And how can we,
exactly.
because we always ignored it in academia. I know, because this was
I know.
the
We
field
know
which I
that.
wanted to study, but nobody was giving me grants for that. So and then in the end, defense gave me now aka right now Department of War gave me gave me money to study complexity, which I did actually. And yeah, but this is actually the science from which we can on which we can draw
That's
to and maybe AGI will help us, as it will make room
wait,
for
wait, wait,
us to.
why is AGI a separate category? I mean, it's you put. I think AGI, and I'm not always comfortable with that term, and super intelligence and all that. I don't.
There is no definition,
Oh,
so
yes,
you are
so
rightfully not
exactly. So
comfortable.
But what it represents is an evolution understanding. I mean, it's another way in which we're able to understand sort of natural principles as they get, and what is it to create living things. We're not only creating models, we're creating things that have their own agency. And this is why I come back to the Markov blanket concept, and that's where I think Carl Friston's contribution is really primary in that. And things self-evidence themselves at different scales, and we can start to understand the mechanics of that. And he will also say that, that he and Chris Fields, that this is, and Michael Levin, they're all in the same boat here, that these things are the interface between the quantum and the classical, and they're irreducible on the quantum state. And so we're getting this very expanded notion. So intelligence is not this single thing, is these multiple adaptations that we have of things trying to understand each other in this network, in this field, is a field. Uh, and that's just a different way of organizing ourselves and seeing ourselves and valuing ourselves. And it's in complete collision with the current speculative wagering. But the speculative wagering thing doesn't work. I mean, that's the other thing. It just doesn't work at some point. And so it is cancerous. But at some point it consumes itself. I mean, when Carl wrote in the very nice review of the book, I mean, it's basically what he said is we have these cancers that eat themselves, and that's what we're trying to get away from. And that is the dominant narrative right now in American culture. And I think, but now I hope we're getting on the other side of that. That's where my
Yeah.
optimism is like, huh? But I can
We
see
have
it.
to. There's no. It seems like there's
And there's
no
no
no other.
alternative.
I
Right.
mean, we either crash with this wave, which is the wrong one, in which nature and humanity are commodities for accumulation and opportunity, and for
That's right.
predatorial practices. Whoever predates better wins. Wow, what a wonderful world, right? So, but coming to back to the let's AGI, super intelligence, and so on, and my hopes that it will help. I see it as an evolutionary step to intelligence,
Yeah.
and that's so from this perspective, this like transhumanism and
Yeah. Yeah.
transcendence. This is kind of an older book, right? So, and it's a collection of essays from. Very well known transhumanist scientists and so on, but transcendence, yes, and that again what we are talking about here with the new awareness and all these patterns. And so how do we understand this the consciousness and the fact that actually we are in tune with
Right.
certain values that are part of
That's right.
the universe. And then like also Michael Levin, yeah, I really love it when he says, well, yeah, I mean, if I want to stagnate, I don't want to change, fine, I'm gonna die. I know. It's like change or adapt or
Right.
die. And therefore, but once I change, I'm not the same, right? Again.
Right.
So the idea is that as you rightfully say in your book, which I can't wait to be released, um we will live, coexist with the gods among us. They can be a chip in my brain, or they can be an implant that helps me orient, or maybe helps me detect flourishing, or detect when someone is not
But it,
truthful.
yes.
Who
No, but
knows?
exactly. I mean, so when I was and I was writing the book, and it was getting too complex, and I said, okay, now create your other Imanicus, and actually, whatever, call it a god, whatever, the other way of thinking digested it and came up with things that I didn't think about. I could see where they came from, but it was a
Exactly.
unique contribution, I'm seeing that over again. But what it does, I think, is it creates a explicit way of sort of validating different kinds of knowledge and being able to share it in a way, and moving, and I think it is a natural evolutionary state in which these things become more explicit. Thierry de Chardin called about the noosphere. This is the geosphere, the biosphere. We are moving in a noosphere, the Novocene, whatever it is. I mean, this is, and we're not just the single reference points. This is where, it's a Copernican revolution on steroids. It's like, uh, and
Correct.
And so we have to be comfortable with that, but that's no problem because we are part of something. We have a false consciousness of our own boundaries. We're part of something much bigger than we can actually express. And 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 and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I think that was all you couldn't say that in scientific circles. You'd be
Yeah.
drawn. I mean, and or any idea of teleology or any idea of agency. I mean, I'm talking to Michael about this and saying, well, gee, for a biologist to talk about agency, and because I know this in my own career, you could get to the back door of cybernetics and you say, well, okay, here's a cybernetic system. I can build the goddamn thing. This it's real. It's real. But the neo-Darwinism, everything's random variation, and that permeated economics, it permeated everything. And now we're growing beyond that. I think that's where my optimism comes because we're actually at the fundamental level, we're letting go of these very primitive ideas, and they're losing their grip. You couldn't question it when in our career, Chris. It was career suicide to challenge those things.
But I mean, there are many who, of course, I don't know if the majority, yes, who want to keep things as they are, and they are afraid of this drastic change, obviously. So it's, I mean, yeah, you and me and Michael and the people from your podcast, of course, yes, they see it. But the question is, yes, because exactly that's the idea. Yes, we live in a, let's say, open-ended intelligence universe, and we are one step on this evolutionary scale spiral, let's call it like that. And of course, yeah, in order to evolve, to survive, we have to evolve and transcend our limitations, because as of now, we show that we are a failed species. Sorry for the harsh diagnosis, but it was not mine. It's Woody Allen recently in a podcast, and I felt it immediately. This is correct. That's how I feel. We have to change so drastically, in the ways in which we function, in which we think about ourselves, and about where we belong and who are we in this bigger
Yes.
picture. And the thing is, but now you see with experiments like Michael Levin and these two scientists which I mentioned, Tommaso Firo with his energy matter information, and Marco is has proven the unified holographic, that the universe is holographic, right? Again, yes, holonic. He's proving that from the anesthesiologist perspective, and it's
Yeah.
amazing. I will send you the
Yeah.
papers.
Yeah. No.
That is really so important. Why is it important? Because the humanity really, well, I mean, the most important thing right now, I think, is to educate, number one, of course, the kids in kindergarten, that they are part of something bigger and not some small pieces in a mechanism that can be controlled from top down. And our politicians, those who are open to that, they have to be really educated about this bigger picture, because they can really turn the
But
wheels.
I
I
see.
mean, I
I'm
don't
not
think we
sure.
can dismantle. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that that even the notion of a politician, I think, is off.
Exactly.
So I think
But it exists.
no, I know what you're saying. It's like the people have privileged insight into things. I mean, the whole idea of a political system, and as we've designed it, I think we when we step back and have a new design space, the whole distinction between policy and economics, all these things start to go. We're creating a living system. And I think we learn from our own bodies and how they work and how they. I mean, one of the things that interests me is the idea of, okay, what is it, governance, and how do we learn the self-regulation system, but also I'm looking more at the immune system and how the immune system works, and the immune system in the brain, actually, but people didn't realize that. Um, and that what do you define as the boundary between something in and between something out, and how do you protect that at the periphery? It turns out our immune system, our lymphic system, basically collects all the sewage actually in the body and looks at the lymph nodes and then does an analysis. Uh-oh, things are not good, and then they send out reaction the appropriate. Well, if we have a body politic and we have a body, there are ways in which we have to protect the various parameters of that in order to keep it alive. And so when you have certain toxic, this is what I struggle with. You have toxic things like hate speech and things that are deliberately designed to destroy the thing. I mean, does that have real merit, or do you have to shut that down? You're just as immune system. You said a T cell after that and shut that down. How do you dynamically maintain the boundaries to keep life like and be able to dynamically incorporate new kinds of complexity in it? But you do need to protect the boundaries. And so it's not a fully free system. I mean, we can't breathe everything. We can't eat
It's
everything.
not chaos. Yes, I agree. We need some discipline there. What I wanted to say here is, well, a very good point with the immunity, because what I am grappling with this day is finding a way to design governance that is immune to capture, right?
Yeah,
How do
exactly.
we deploy that,
Exactly.
right?
That's exactly what triggered
Yes.
my thinking on it. And so so the immune system is constantly surveilling the state of the body and looking at those things that represent inflammations, collapses, and then what are the steps? It's more like it's like the police in some sense. It's like it's not like a judge. You're not going to go to court. You're not going to you're not going to litigate it. You're actually going to identify it and respond to it because it is existential. And it's existential to, I mean, many different life forms have different kinds of immune systems because and this is where the Markov blanket comes really into saying, okay, I have a particular identity and definition, and I adapt to a particular context, and there's certain kind of biomolecules that I work with versus someone else, and I combine them in different ways. But I have a unique identity, and I have to protect that at some point. And that doesn't work in a sort of through a litigation. It is it's definitional. It's like, okay, because if that boundary doesn't hold, then I die. If I inhale this toxic gas, I'm gone. I can't do that. So I have to have senses out there and so and so how do you? This is the capture thing that you're talking about. So, I mean, I've always thought about the law of requisite variety was capture is that you have one system can create more complexity than another system can regulate against, and then it dominates it. That's one form, but it's another form. Just it could be small things at the edges that come in, and like again, a microbe, a bacterium, or whatever can be lethal.
Those nudges,
Well,
right?
no, it could be
Exactly.
legal. They can so a misinformation of a certain kind can metastasize into something that they can actually destroys the whole organism. So you really this is where the biology becomes really important beyond the physics. It's like, okay, what is it? Because biology is contextual and semantic and unique to the unique living entity, right? And it can perish or or it can recombine. So anyway, so that I think is another aspect to this that we have not really thought about as much, at least in my mind.
Totally, and again, how I see it, right? I mean, it is this the immunity to capture. I think very much is related, in my opinion, to this new awareness, to the biology, to how we function, and paying more attention and being more present, because it's this moral compass, and the U.S. Constitution actually has it all written there with the people and all what is there, but we don't do it. That's why I was mentioning the politicians. Just at least make them read it and actually, because that's why I came to this country in the first place. And I think immigrants know more than the Americans, the U.S.
I
Constitution.
appreciate what it means. Yes, that's right. But we've lost that.
Yes.
Yeah, we've lost it. I mean, by the people, for the people, of the people. I mean that, but is
Just read it again. It's not too long, It's like it's brilliant. If we would just do that, things would be so much better. But of course,
But
the
that's
the the,
really
the
hard to do
capture.
that. That's when we start to understand the mechanisms of what does it mean to really do that, and how the things do that to
Mhm.
capture it, and that, I think we're learning that from biology and physics and there's other things. Okay, there are certain laws that are invoked that you have to recognize, and the law records a variety of what he was saying. So you have to design things that have the resilience to be able to do that. And what does that mean? And that's why I come back and say, well, the whole idea of decentralization itself doesn't achieve that. It just does. We decentralize everything. No, it doesn't work because complex
Let me
systems.
tell you why. Let me tell you why decentralization doesn't achieve that, because that's my stuff, right? I mean, so you can blame me, but the dream was not that. The dream was a cypherpunk dream. Why? And you stated it kind of very clearly. You said monitoring, it's like
That's right.
what do we observe, but also more important than this, where is our attention, right? So if my attention is to getting rich, to the token going high, to extraction from the treasuries and so on, versus, how do we together manage a
Right.
commons, the treasury, or
Right.
whatever good we share there. Then things are going to be captured. Decentralization will not work because, I mean, I
Exactly
can
right.
do anything I want as an individual
That's right.
in our libertarian, of course, ethos, right? Of course, I want everybody to be free, but they can be free to do anything. But
Exactly.
this is here
Right.
is where the point. Yeah, I don't know if you have seen this, the ethical imagination by Margaret Somerville. So that's really journeys of the human spirit. That's a different, in this world, in a world in which we all would be aware, right? And we would decide from this kind of space, yeah, the human spirit and the higher values, if, of course, everybody is referring to them, although we forgot them. And the Constitution has those. They are embedded in its writing. If we would act from that and we could resist to the tribal, narratives and win-lose paradigm, things would be so much better. But the thing is, we are now in this vortex, yeah, and everybody seems to, as you were saying also in the beginning, I mean, yeah, it's this competitive world. I even do not think competition is the right word, right? I mean,
But I mean,
it's
it gets back.
contribution.
But it gets back to your notion of holonics, because it is a cognitive light count, and the whole idea of a cell having it only not only has a sense of itself, but it has a sense of itself being part of a larger self, and that
Correct.
is, as I said,
Superordination,
it's at every
subordination
scale.
to the whole,
Well,
superordination to the parts. Yes.
and so when it makes changes and it tries to make trade-offs, it doesn't just do it into self-maximization. It looks like, well, maybe there's something I do jointly with someone else, something else, and the joint combination actually creates more value, and more value in the sense that it reduces uncertainty and energy consumption and ensures my capacity to self-evidence myself in conjunction with. But it's that, to me, is like the really key element in the design of any complex system, and that's what I wrestle with. Is like, okay, how do I design a organization or monetary system that actually incentivizes and works that way, and I think we're getting that. I think, and again, there's this recent work that's done with Marcus Buehler. He cited when they can model how an embryo grows, and all the multicellular combination of how it expands out. That each thing is giving up something about itself in order to be part of a larger self. And what is the mechanism for that? How does that work? And if because then that's where alignment comes. That's where, but you get the alignments, and you keep changing conditions, but you're getting alignment at different scales, and you're allowing the biodiversity to take place. That should be what I would call part of the incentive system. that 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 is
I agree.
and that's the alignment system. And so that's what you're saying, the alignment. And so we feel that internally. We feel that we're we can see it, our own condition, our own local condition, then our global condition. And so there's this resonance between the two. So when you start to look at sort of the work on microtubules and the different frequencies, you say, oh gosh, there are these different frequencies, different levels of frequency that align themselves, and there are certain kinds of forms, you can call it platonic forms, quantum forms, structural tetrahedrons and others that actually capture and be able to resonate certain kinds of patterns and maintain that. And that's what you talk about, your platonic shapes. That's what Joel was talking about. And there's this wonderful a live stream lecture done on the Active Inference Institute by a young quantum biologist, which he talks about all these things. And it's really profound. And I do think that it ties into these different, there can be structures that are good and there's structures that could equal decrement. How do you create those alignments? And what are the forms?
Yeah, I think, again, yeah, it's the vocabulary.
Yeah.
I even do not think how do you create those alignments. It's it gives it justice because the alignments are there. The question is, how do we see them? How do we pay the right attention to see them? Why? And I will tell you why. Because our attitude is we regard everything as a commodity and as utility, right? I mean, what's the use? What use do you have for me, right? So here I am, I'm the CEO. Okay, you're useful or not. This is the labor, again, the paradigm and so on and so forth. But there is another dimension, and again, it's not only me, it's also, yeah, in the quantum, and here she said in this ethical imagination, and it's so beautiful, say, how then, it's called experiencing the sacred, and that is the alignment, which is there. But we kind of is like, how do we design it? Come on, it's there. We just have
It's
to,
recognizing it. It's recognizing it. It's confirmed.
recognize it. That's the word.
Well, it's a
Yes.
deference to it.
How then
It
do we experience the sacred in our secular societies? And that's another one. Yes. So there's so much paradigm shift. Probably many of them, which all converge. Yeah. Now in your first principles, and I know because I listening to the podcast, they all converge overall over this. Yes. And I
it's so
think
fulfilled. It's
they
good.
will create, like they are creating this safe landing for society in this day and age when it's all collapsing, the wrong paradigm is collapsing. And the thing is, yeah, it's a recognition in the end. It's a recognition, but we need the momentum, this momentum to really be in the mass media and everywhere. So people,
But,
and now we are approaching New
but
Year,
here's
Christmas, and
another
so
thing.
on.
Well, another thing about you, I agree with you, intention, but is an interesting thing that what you attend to is what you value. But in any kind of really creative work, I mean, Joel was talking about these are talking about Bach, and I very much feel the same way. But the Bach, there's something sacred in Bach. But but what they did was they didn't attend to. It was it was like they receptive. They opened themselves to something. In other
That's
words,
right.
it's not me. It's something I have a certain
Or
skill set.
Federico, we see his enlightenment experience, which triggered him to shift his paradigm from silicon to irreducible. So, that's exactly what I
Yes.
meant when I said we don't design it. It's like, okay, it's there,
No,
just
what
see
I
it.
think, but that is some kind of meditation, is the ability to get yourself in a state of being receptive and not projecting some kind of
As
your
simple as being in nature, and then you see it. It's impossible
that's
not
the
to.
humility of the thing. I mean, you really have to let
Yes,
go of your attempts to contain and control, and that is and being open to that, and then you start to see things you never saw before. I mean, that's what I find. And so then because you're not protecting your hubris. You're saying, no, I really don't know. I really, and if I could open my, I can, now I can hear things. I can sound, I'm seeing and hearing and smelling things I never, because I was filtering them out because I was trying to put
that's
it in a
right.
container I could control because I've got so
That's
much
right.
I got so much fear, and no, well, you don't let go of that.
That's the power and
It,
control in societies in which we grew up with this mental cast. And then there's,
absolutely.
yeah, this I don't know if you came across this book by Stuart Kaufman. It's an older book, but it's amazing.
I
And
know the
now,
book, the sacred. Oh yeah,
this
sure.
one, reinventing the sacred.
Right. No,
It's really because this is exactly because he's being a biologist and this genius awarded biologist. Yeah, he has seen it. But when I read it first, I didn't see it like I see it now. That's another thing. Because I was too much into the incentives and how to
No, that's
design
true.
them and so on.
That's true. That's true. That's true. But
So how
that's
do we
why
reinvent the sacred in order to achieve this alignment and immunity to capture? That's a question which I think we remain with. And yeah, I wish I would have an answer right now, but I'm still looking for it as well.
well,
And
I think there's a
but
pathway.
I
I
feel
think
it's
there's ways,
coming.
but there are ways of not going. I mean, I think we first place you recognize the illegitimacy of the argument, and you and that
Yes,
reduction, and it doesn't explain nature. It doesn't. It's not good science anymore. And that's a big move. And
correct.
so I see within a lot of the people I work with this whole openness to being able to meditate, to think about things, to not project, and know that out of that comes creativity. There's a whole new set of narratives and certainly in the neuroscience community that recognizes this. Um, that's so different than it was just 5 or 10 years ago. Um, so I think there's certain practices, but I think the practices manifest themselves in certain technologies and infrastructures and efforts that separate out and break with this sort of reductionist, extractive mentality. And so as I say, I can see some light there.
Yes, yes,
I can,
just
I
at
can,
least to remember now, 'cause Christmas is coming, that we are part of this
that's
loving
right. That's right.
universe, right?
It's right. It's right. Solstice is past. We're past solstice. Now we're going. It's getting more light,
That's
more
perfect timing,
closer to the
yes,
sun. So
for
we're
optimism.
moving in the right direction. I but so I think we should sort of wind up a little bit here. But what I'm thinking about is when you're involved in so many efforts and you really have established yourself as a very vocal thought leader in this. But what do you see is going to happen to the whole? To me, the whole crypto world is still built on this pump and dump speculative model. I mean, everyone's saying they're going to save the world, but when you really look under the hood, it's like, okay, is it going up? Is it going down? So, is it a meme coin? Is it not a meme coin? And so, I think digital currencies and things are going to be important. Things are going to go into it. There will be something like equivalent to on-chain X, Y, Z, but I think we're going to go through a big shock in that world. I think stable coins are going to have a big impact, and it's going to be interesting to see. But then if people can't really trust them, and they feel their data's they're being exploited, then there's going to be what's happened. Are we really put in the hands of the predators now? And that's going to force a recognition of a new kind of infrastructure that is really rigorously grounded. But I think that's going to take a while. And I don't, when I look at the 1,000 tokens out there, I mean, I think, to what extent is what are the incentive structures? And the incentive structures are not the sacred. It's like, oh, what is it going up or is it going down? You know, or am I being too harsh?
No, no, you are not being too harsh at all. It is time to redefine a new economy, right? I
That's
mean,
right.
that's the
That's right.
thing. And again, it's impossible not to bring again the AI factor. Yes, the
No, the A
economy of
factor is you. Well,
algorithms. Yes.
the agentic aspect is really important, but it's more than algorithms. It's more than algorithms.
It's more, but it
It's
depends
more
how
than
smart the
algorithm.
algorithm is. We can call the AGI and the super intelligence still an algorithm, right? We can call it like
But
that
I
because
don't think
that's
I
where we
think
are
that
headed.
is a conceit that is used to distract people. I just don't. Yes, they're going to get. We're not the smartest. We're not going to be the quote the smartest things around, and so there are and that being able to come to terms with certain kinds of new levels of cognition and autonomous cognition is going to be really challenging. I think, um, but we have to accept that reality, um, and that. And I guess the other thing is that people say, "Oh, we want to put people in the loops," and we're gonna. That's just not going to work. That's just not going to work. It already doesn't work.
There are some models now, which again, in the context of the AI eating the labor, yes, and this whole economic model in which we function now, like some have, let's say, UBI embedded, some others are regarding, for example, in order to keep, let's say, the AI aligned with humanity and or with these good values. Um, they are thinking a sort of new licensing models for the software which is being deployed that would practically put some sort of, as you call them, Markov blanket, some boundaries when the AI itself detects that it's going in the wrong direction, the
Oh, I
direction
think
of the
well,
wrong
that's a
values.
different that's a yeah, that I think boundaries as Markov blankets, that to me is that but that's building something that recognizes the physics and the biology of these whole things rather than doing it rather than having
Exactly.
governance as an afterthought, actually build it in from first principles into how it works. So, talking to David about this is and he had become good ideas. You say, well, look, you're creating new roads. You've got agents. You're gonna you can think of an agent as a car, and you're going to have brakes on it. You're going to have steering wheels. You have all these things. You're going to have rules of the road. You're going to have insurance. You're going to have licensing. So what does it mean to create a safe environment within these contexts of different kinds of agent? And what world would we put? And that's where the political economy of this thing comes together. Is saying, okay, I'm going to create a system that's going to have roads, it's going to have license, and we're going to recognize different kinds of agents, and they're going to have different kinds of rules. You got to have good brakes, you got to have good steering wheels. You can't speed in certain sections, and all of that, and there are enforcements on this that we can enforce it. So I think that we're creating these ecologies of agents that have these characteristics that are based upon it. When you think about a car, you say, well, you have to understand the physics of a car to build a brake and a steering wheel, right? I mean, it's like so likewise for an agent. So well, if I don't want it to crash, I got to understand the physics of that. Likewise for the agent. Okay, why don't we do that? And so we're going to only have these kind of agents run on these kind of roads doing these kind of things, and you have to be a licensed user of it. You have to know what you're doing in order to drive it. In order to have it. I think, and everyone says, "Oh no, it's just going to be super abundance and let it go." And then that happened. Well, it happened to the railroads and everything. Look, the destruction of the West and the indigenous people. The cost was enormous, and who benefited from that? Just the super elite, the gilded class. We're playing that game over again, and we don't have to.
Yes.
We don't have to. And
But as you're mentioning the car example, my thought is going like the car will be intelligent very soon, and we don't drive it anymore. It
right,
drives us. It serves us. Hopefully, it depends if the AIs want to,
right,
the
right.
super intelligences want to use it in a different way. But the thing is. Yes, so then even this model is changing. Yes, it's like I'm not driving the car. Okay, the AI, let's suppose they will design it better than we do, and they may find other ways to even coordinate traffic, like
Sure.
as real flow and so on and so
Right,
forth.
right.
So that's maybe also a parallel in which we can do with the economy as a
Oh,
flow
absolutely.
of true value that
Absolutely.
that
I mean,
I
I think
think
we can have
the AI can help.
right. I mean, no, I think they have AI agents be able to actually decide and allocate capital in order to create public good
Exactly.
and to change some outcome. And so I mean, right now we're looking at building financial instruments to do that. So I could set up a
And that's
product.
your book. Your book is
Yeah,
showing
but the
how.
book,
I mean,
yeah, part as part of the book, but it's work we're doing outside the book too. I mean, actually, so I think it's doable. I really do think it's doable. And I wasn't sure of that, say, 3 years ago. But
yes, yes.
yeah, yeah. I mean. I mean, to me, we've seen the kind of work that, Michael's doing, but also Marcus is in this whole idea of, okay, you can have complex cellular systems adapt to scale, and we can mimic those processes in creating a networks of agents working around common goals and keeping themselves alive and creating value in that. I think you can create an economic system that way. Um, and so that's where my head and that's sort of what our podcast, the next generation podcast, is going to be around. What is that argument? What that discussion? What how do we really make it real? Um, that's
Totally.
okay.
And also redefining, yes, redefining, yeah, who are we?
Who are
Our
we?
own ethics, yeah, and what is flourishing, right? Well, I mean, redefining all on the basis of these first principles and the values. Yeah, what are the values? Because everybody is confused. Value is my bank account. That's all what matters. And then, okay, good luck. Here we
Yeah, but
are.
I think
So
people are recognizing. I think there's a deeper sense that people want to relate to people and be in tune with with other people around that relationships. People start to value relationships, the relationship to nature. That's coming out. I mean, it's like there's certain things you can't buy, and it doesn't
that's
matter
right.
how many goods you have. I think that, and that you can't buy happiness. Yes, you need to have a minimum income,
That's exactly
but
where we started with this quote
and
from
so yeah.
Gilder. Yes, yes. I mean, these things which are non unmeasurable, unquantifiable,
Well,
and
I don't think see, I think it's not necessarily unquantifiable. I mean, I think there are
no, but
degrees of
but but trust, for example, trust. When I was talking about the trust, the account, yes, you put more trust. This is something which is very hard to quantify, And 0, 1. I mean, 0 is easier because okay, you betray me once, 0, or maybe point
but
0.5.
well,
But
I looked at this. I mean, the whole idea of levels of trust about it depends on what I mean, and what are the signals that you have from different people in order to trust them, and what is the cost of a failure in that. I mean, and so and you have systems of trust and legal systems and bonds and all that. And I think this is you can develop methods for increasing and incentivizing trust. Um, but right now it's people are incentivized to exploit it and
yes,
um but yeah, I mean if you're
that's
counting.
exactly the story with the crypto capture. And what I wanted to say here also, yes, with trust, because I led about 20 years ago, I led a network of centers of excellence on privacy, security, and trust. And we were looking for definitions. And I came up with this, like, you guys, because they were thinking very much like you, yes, we can quantify, we can do this and that. But, you can also bootstrap. And it is a choice. In the end, you can also choose to trust or not. And it is, at least for me, I have it like an intuitive thing. Yes, I trust or not. And I do not
Oh,
know how it works. Maybe Mike
I
Levin
see.
can explain. No, that really, this
No, but I think
intuition
what
really
you do is
works.
you work on frequencies. I mean, to me, it's a gut response to people that there you can see you. I mean, if you can
True.
read certain behaviors and stuff like that, and you can just say, that
And you
I'm
know
not,
that. Yeah, I think
yeah, I'm
everybody
not
can
getting a
relate.
good
Yes.
read on this person. I mean, but I think you can. I think there's a scientific basis for that. I mean, this is where, yeah, I get back to microtubules.
That's right. So we have to discover that, and maybe then we can encode or whatever
That's right.
into
That's
this
right.
bigger economy, the trust economy. Yeah, those are the values which I want. The trust, the caring.
Yes.
How do we model that? How do we deploy that economy? I mean, for me, the chasm right now between where we are right now,
No,
yes,
it's
I'm in Washington D.C. and this trust and
oh, that's
caring
right.
economy
You're
is
in
so
DC.
big.
Oh my God. Yes, you're in
Yeah.
Washington. Oh my God. I no. I
I'm
lived
being
there.
reminded at every second. Yes.
No, I was there. I was in the Carter administration, and even then I felt it. Now this administration is just over the top. So, but
you
we're
know. Yeah.
at we're at a turning point. I mean, anyway, we, well,
Yes, yes, and I really, of course, that is the invitation as well, yes, for everybody to really pay attention, to shift their attention to this other, yes, the values which they intrinsically feel they have, and especially now, as we are mentioning, yes, the holidays are coming and New Year's resolutions and so on, and it's impossible not to feel, yes, that when you are in the wrong environment, that is
yes.
not aligned with these values, it's impossible. And if you feel, then probably the next step would be to listen to the First Principles podcast. Maybe you will find you will find something
Well, thank you.
in yourself. Yes.
Well,
But I think we have to join
but you have
forces,
faith
yes,
that it
to do
exists there. It exists there, and that
exactly.
we're getting to see it. The science is there. I think so. It is in the season. Well, look, I really, as always, enjoy our conversations, and we're getting there. We're getting there.
Thank you. Yes, and please use your imagination. Yes,
Okay.
the
All right.
ethical
Okay.
imagination. I think it's more important than anything else right now to envision the new world. Yeah, to envision this landing, safe landing space
Not only
that will
envision it, but make
hopefully
it
get us
possible.
on the flourishing trajectory. Yes, because we even did not get to define what flourishing is. So. So yes, that will be a next conversation.
Yes. Okay.